Verse 16, for I say to you, I will no longer eat of it. I'll no longer eat of the Passover meal until it is, and then underline this phrase, fulfilled in the kingdom of God. Fulfilled in the kingdom of God. Then he took the cup and gave thanks and said, take this and divide it among yourselves. For I say to you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine. He's talking about wine. I won't drink wine. And then underline this phrase, until the kingdom of God comes. Are you picking up that Jesus seems to be implying that he's pushing the pause button on his celebration of the Passover Seder, the Passover meal? He's saying, I'm pushing pause. I'm not going to eat any more of this. I'm not going to drink any more of this until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God and until the kingdom of God comes. Well, what does that mean? Let's see if we can clear this up a bit. This is my personal view, putting the pieces together, and you can listen to it and come to your own conclusions. The Passover Seder, as we said, is the name of the Jewish meal. And one of the things that Jewish families did back then and still do today is at the Passover Seder, they would recount the story of how the Lord brought Israel out of slavery in Egypt. They'll tell it in a way that their kids can hear it and enjoy it and be blessed by it. And one of the things they do is they read through 4 I will statements that are made by God in Exodus 6 through 7. I think I put it on your outline. He's giving a promise to Israel that he's going to save them from slavery in Egypt. And these 4 I will statements are actually 4 stages that also represent the work that God does in the life of every single believer. After each statement was read, each I will statement was read, they would pass around a cup of wine, and everybody would take a drink from the same cup of wine. Each cup corresponded to one of these I will statements. They still do this in the Passover Seder. And they would always drink them in a specific order that lined up with the scriptures. First, they would read, I am the Lord, I will bring you out from under the burdens of Egypt. And this would be called the cup of sanctification. This was God's promise, I'm going to get you out of Egypt. To the believer, it's the promise that I'm going to save you from sin. I'm going to pull you out of the world where you are controlled by sin. Second, they would read, I will rescue you from their bondage. And this would be called the cup of deliverance. And this was a big deal because even though Israel would be brought out of Egypt, Israel would still need to have Egypt brought out of them. You know, sometimes you move places geographically, but you've still got all the effect of the place that you've been living for a long time, affecting you on the inside. You get saved, you give your life to Jesus. Yes, you're a new being, but you've been controlled by the world and by sin for a long time, and it takes time. Even though God got you out of the world, it takes time for God to get the world out of you. And that was the cup of deliverance. Third, they would read, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. This would be called the cup of redemption or the cup of blessing. This was God's promise to say, I'll redeem you, which means I'll pay whatever price is necessary to make you my own. Whatever price is necessary to free you from physical, mental, and spiritual slavery, owing a debt to nobody. I'm going to set you free. I'm going to pay the price. And the parallel is obvious for you and I, that Jesus came to pay the price that we would cost to be set free spiritually, emotionally, ultimately physically, in every sense of the word. He paid that price. And then fourth, the last cup, they would read, I will take you as my people, and I would be your God. And this was called the cup of praise, because how many of you know if you're on your 4th cup of wine, you're going to be praising one way or another? You see, this was God's promise. When he says, I'm going to take you, it was his promise to literally take his people to where he was. I'm going to bring you to where I am. I'm going to be your God. We're going to be together literally. That was the 4th cup, the cup of praise. What meal, what feast is Jesus eating here at the Last Supper? He's eating the Passover Seder. So check out what happens next in verses 19 through 20. Jesus is going to lead his disciples in taking communion. He's going to teach them communion. Verse 19, it says, and he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Likewise, he also took the cup after supper, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is shed for you. And in case we're not tracking what happens next, Paul clears it up for us in 1 Corinthians 10. I put this on your outline. Paul writes the cup of blessing, underline that. The cup of blessing which we bless, is it not the communion, underlining communion, of the blood of Christ? So Paul is telling us that right here, Luke 22, when Jesus is using the cup of wine in the Passover Seder to teach his disciples communion, it was the cup of blessing that he was using when he gave them the sacrament of communion, which is the third cup of the Passover Seder. So we know they got all the way up to the third cup. There's no mention anywhere of the fourth cup, the cup of praise. But what we do have is we have Jesus talking about pausing this Passover meal, quote, until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God and until the kingdom of God comes. So the only thing left to pause in this Passover Seder, the Last Supper, is the fourth cup, the cup of praise. That's the only thing left to do that's left undone. Most Bible scholars agree, and so do I, that this Passover Seder is going to be unpaused and completed when Jesus raises that fourth cup and drinks from it at the marriage supper of the Lamb, when his church and his people are gathered together around him in Zion, in Jerusalem, and he begins to rule and reign on the earth for 1,000 years at the beginning of the millennium. Every time I share that, I barely get through it emotionally. And I don't even know why conceptually, but there's just something about that future moment, marriage supper of the Lamb, that is just, it's everything we long for coming together in one moment. It's Jesus, it's his church, it's the world made right, it's Jesus ruling and reigning on the earth, it's us in resurrected bodies, it's the end of sadness and misery, it's just everything. It's when we're going to truly celebrate. He's our people. We are his people. He is our God. And we're inseparably together, literally forever. What a moment that's going to be. From the time a date was set for a Jewish wedding, the groom wouldn't allow wine to touch his lips until he was joined with his bride. And so too, Jesus has left the last cup of wine of the Passover Seder, the cup of praise, untouched, to be drunk when he and his bride, the church, celebrate being joined together forever at the marriage supper of the Lamb. It's incredible.